time has come for the Scottish people to make a life-changing decision whether or not we want to take back full political power of our country.
Why wouldn't we want to be our own country and stand up and look after our own people?
So I've put together a short film addressing the main issues I feel people are still unclear about.
My name's Chris Law. I'm the main campaigner for the Spirit of Independence, and the Spirit of Independence is an organisation we set up to get the message out there and carry material across and around Scotland in a 1950s former military Green Goddess. Now these were designed originally for protecting us, allegedly, in the event of a nuclear strike, and we were going to carry water and pump water to affected areas at a top speed of 45 miles an hour. They were decommissioned, and I wanted to use a vehicle that symbolised the transformation in Scotland. So we have a vehicle now that's about hope rather than fear, and it's about ending Trident rather than protecting nuclear weapons. Obviously the idea is both online and offline make as much presence, because it's not just about the argument which has been on for 2.5 years, it's also about confidence. And we should be feeling good about this. We've won the argument, now we need to win the referendum.
But wouldn't we be better together?
If we're better together, then why are we not better together now?
First and foremost, let's discuss the pound. What's actually going to happen with our currency?
I find it the most intellectually dishonest part of the entire campaign for the No campaign. Always the pound has been available to use. Around the world, if you take your pounds elsewhere, you can exchange them at a bank for euros or dollars or Thai baht if you're in Thailand or wherever else. In terms of currency union, well, people are divided on it, frankly. There's people who believe it would be better than a currency union. That would be good for the rest of the UK as well, because it means we wouldn't have a different currency exchange. We'd also have a central bank, which would restrict, of course, our fiscal and monetary policy. Now, the benefits of that are, well, it means business as usual for most, if not all, organisations involved in transactions, and also it's something we're accustomed to. And it also helps against balance of payments for UK debt. So the argument that we couldn't use a pound is fallacious, quite frankly, and the argument for currency, well, it's to create a continuation of where we're at the moment. However, there is another side to this. People have been arguing that why don't we have our own currency, i.e. a Scottish pound. The Isle of Man does it, Jersey does it, no problems there. What that would incur for Scotland would be a situation that would not be in its best position necessarily, but neither for the rest of the UK, because there would be transaction costs between the rest of the UK and Scotland. However, we wouldn't be tied down by fiscal and monetary policy that's currently been that comes through the Bank of England at the moment. So there's pluses and minuses on both sides. But for the UK actually to say you can't use the pound, it's just utter rubbish, frankly, because it's part of our assets, as is the Bank of England, which of course was nationalised after the Second World War. It's a UK asset. I heard George Galloway in debate with Jim Sillars talk about the Bank of England as a foreign bank, and clearly doesn't know his history because it's been nationalised for quite a long time.
But who sets the interest rates?
The Bank of England dictates interest rates, which is independent from the UK government, and would continue to do so in an independent Scotland. So are they non-political decisions made by the Bank of England? The answer is no, because I can remember Mark Carney last year. I work in finance, so we have to listen to what they're saying, and I help people with property finance, so interest rates for mortgages are very important. And he said last year, once unemployment goes below 7%, or inflation goes below 2%, we'll put interest rates up. And of course they haven't done. And we now have inflation below 2% and of course unemployment below 7% overall. So that's a political decision, let's face it. And the other thing is, at the moment, there's 9 people sit on the board for the Bank of England, none of which represent Scotland. And when Scotland becomes independent, of course, there would be a place on that board for a member from the Scottish Government and Scottish Parliament.
Next, our nuclear weapon ship Trident. Won't there be a lot of jobs lost if we go independent?
There's a bit of a myth about Faslane creating a huge number of jobs. Jackie Bailey once said it was 11,000. Other people have said it's 8,000. In fact, directly employed, I think it's nearer 500. Somebody gave me the analogy the other day, in fact, which I thought was quite interesting. It's a bit like saying, well, we can get rid of hanging, but we don't want to do that because it'll mean the hangman will not get his job, and the people who build the stand for the hanging won't have a job, and of course the rope maker will be out of a job as well, and the guy that does the trapdoor will be out of a job. So You have to look at, first of all, the moral cause as well as economic cause. So morally, as well as in terms of risk, there's a very clear reason why I want rid of Trident. The cost of it, for a start, is phenomenal. The cost to Scotland alone is about 8 billion out of the total cost of its replacement. So morally, it's a no-brainer, because the money that's wasted on replacement of Trident, which are not ours, they're on hire, by the way, we don't actually own them, it could be money better spent on creating new jobs, and as many new jobs as possible, particularly in Faslane with the Defence Force. Second thing is, it's a huge danger to the area. When I spoke to people down there, interestingly, we spoke to 2 military police, and they're actually voting yes. Apparently half the base is voting yes as well, because of course it's going to be a Scottish defence base. So as a defence base, there's going to be a lot of opportunities, because Scotland will need a defence force.
Okay, vote for Scotland. We need our independence.
What about the EU? Will they still want Scotland? What do we have to offer?
Actual fact, the EU is there for 3 core purposes. The first core purpose is harmonisation of Europe. In other words, that people work together. There is an ethos. There is not an ethos in the EU to try and kick out a state because it becomes independent. And if any individual, whether it be Foreign Minister or Prime Minister in Spain, is suggesting that, it's more because of their own issues within Spain, i.e. Catalan seceding from the rest of Spain, rather than the EU general ethos of being together. Second thing is, of course, it's about economics and working together. Scotland has 25% of renewables, 50% of oil. It's got a diverse and mixed economy. It's more democratic than the rest of the UK. And if it was to fulfil the indicators of entry into the EU, we're already there. Incidentally, if the UK was to apply just now, it would be considered too undemocratic. So we already fulfil the situation for being in the EU. And lastly, there is no legal statute and law for kicking Scotland out of the EU. So even if someone was to veto it, they would have to create a new law in order to expel Scotland. And one last thing I want to say was, within this discussion, what happens to some of the concessions that the UK get? Well, the UK does get some concessions, and they're decided every 10 years, and the last time was 2010. So the question that was put to the panel was 3 EU experts, it was Leslie Riddoch and Professor John Curtis. The question put to the panel was, what will happen? Will they continue, or what will happen to Scotland? Will they lose them? And the No campaign argued that we'll lose them. Well, of course, you've ever heard a positive thing said from them so far? No. So what the EU panel said was, well, if you were to do that, that would mean all 27 member states would have to come back and renegotiate halfway through that 10-year term. And there is neither the political will or desire to do that. So what would happen, more than likely, would be that when the UK and Scotland become 2 separate nation states, is that Scotland would continue its share of the concessions that come out of its current membership with the EU.
Everybody's given Alex Salmond a really hard time, but wouldn't they have done that with any politician who'd instigated the referendum?
I think what happened in the early 2-3 years ago is that the No campaign, or in particular Labour, tried to frame the debate around Alex Salmond. Now, and they've called him all sorts, from comparing him to Robert Mugabe, to Pol Pot, to all sorts, basically as a dictator. Now we're a modern democracy, we're more democratic than the rest of the UK. He and the SNP were democratically elected, and even although the Scottish Parliament was designed not to have a majority, the SNP got one, which tells you a lot about the state of Labour in Scotland. What's happened, and what excites me about the entire Yes movement, is that although the SNP did deliver the mandate, so we could have a referendum, there's no denying that, and they do have their white paper, what I've also seen is a proliferation of ideas right across some parties and none. So you have the Scottish Green Party, you have the Scottish Socialist Party, you have Women for Independence, Labour for Independence, Africans for Yes, Scottish Asians for Independence. You have a whole range of organisations have come out, and they each have their own view of how society, Scottish society, could be a better place under independence. So it's ridiculous to put it on one individual. And in actual fact, if you think about it, 5-10 years time, when Scotland's been independent, it'll be the last thing that people will be thinking about. So it's been a framing by the No campaign to try and target an individual. I can remember in 2012 all the press trying to make it was a liar. Of course, none of it was based on any evidence. And I think it's backfired, because what's happened is local grassroots communities such as here in Glenrothes have taken it upon themselves to inform themselves, to educate themselves, and then share that with others. And of all the material I'm carrying, I think I've only got 2 small white papers, so that shows you how little I've got from the SNP. So really it's a broad coalition of people. And the one thing that they all believe in is in building a good society, which is something that we seem to have lost sight of in the UK. A startling figure I read about last week in the Herald is that although the economy has doubled in Scotland in the last 30 years, so has poverty. And I find it quite incredible that we're the only country in the world that's discovered oil, become poorer as a result, and we're only one of 2 countries in the world that hasn't bothered to even set up an oil sovereign wealth fund, and the other one being Iraq.
It's about people in Scotland deciding for themselves, and that we will always get the government that we vote for.
And what about borders? Are we really going to need a passport to go down to England?
I don't know what they're expecting the rest of the UK. Are they going to rebuild Hadrian's Wall or the Antonine Wall, or what they're planning to do? This has been around this idea that of the Schengen Agreement, which allows us to move across borders. If you go to Northern Ireland with your passport and you want to go to Southern Ireland, which is an independent nation state, you won't even see a sign that tells you you've crossed the border, let alone any border controls with dogs and military people in military uniforms or security guards or whatever else. If you travel through Europe, you'll find the very same thing. In fact, I can't think of a single example where an EU member state has got any border control. I do remember a time when there was. And again, that's been a framing by the No campaign to cause fear and concern for people, which only works for so long. It's like any propaganda. If you try and use fear for so long, people get quite thick-skinned.
In summary, it appears that yes, we will keep the pound. Keeping Trident is neither moral nor economical for us. It's highly unlikely the EU would want rid of us, and we will be free to travel down south as usual.